Hi, everybody. This is going to be a reading for The Darkness Within, re-released February 28th for Skullgate Media. With me today is Alan Provence. I'm
Hello.
going to be reading the fine part of King Arion Evernight. This piece answers something brought up in book one between Gareth and the king. It's alluded that they had a falling out all those years ago in a couple of places, and if you're anything like me, then you hold on to that piece of information when you read it and wait to see what it could be. So without further ado, Chapter 4, Throne Room, Castle Evernight. Arion walked into the throne room with heavy steps. He was tired and had been dealing with nobles all day. He even had to eat alone since his wife was off sneaking around the servants' halls doing Davilar knows what. Now here he was, the king of Lithanol, answering some last-minute noble's request at an audience late in the evening. He should have had guards with him, what with all the attempts at ending his life and all, but the page had used his secret password that only trusted nobles knew, and only a handful at that. To call him here like this was truly important, and could even be a clue as to who was behind all of this. Besides, he could handle himself, as long as it wasn't magic. He shuddered at the thought of when a sorcerer had taken all the air out of the room, stealing his breath and almost killing him and Marissa. He had felt so powerless. He heard a woman's voice behind him in the hallway and turned as someone came through the door. His weary, forced smile disappeared instantly. The man was huge, well over 6 feet tall, and his corded muscles stood out prominently through his woolen shirt, stretched tight over his barrel chest. He had shoulder-length brown hair that always looked like it could use a combing, but no one dared to get close enough to try it. His blindfold was the only thing out of place. "Tiara, are you sure I need to be wearing this thing?" Gareth couldn't see anything, but when his wife said it was a surprise, well, he hated to disappoint her in anything. Besides, she could get ornery when she didn't get her way. Tiara smiled, then noticed the king staring at them and shoved her husband into the room and bolted back for the door. "Well, after all, you two play nice." She turned and slammed the door closed, sliding a chair over and blocking the door from being opened. Then she remembered the strength of the two men inside and sat down in the chair for good measure, though she hoped it didn't come to that. She had a slim build and long flowing hair that gave an almost dainty look to her short frame. She always kept her platinum blonde hair in twin braids, straight back and set with 2-inch steel balls that would click and clack whenever she was about. Arion frowned deeper and turned to exit the throne room the other way. He wasn't dealing with his past right now, and he was angry that he had been obviously deceived. He reached the doors and pushed, but they wouldn't budge. Shaking his head, he shoved harder, thinking that they were stuck, but they groaned and creaked, holding fast. The king was tall, well over 6.5 feet tall, and it was all muscle. His golden locks fell short, brushing his ceremonial armor but lightly, and his piercing blue eyes seemed to hold one's attention involuntarily. Even though he was now past 50 winters, Arion could still keep up with all of the day-to-day activities that came with being the king of Lithanol. Yet he could not budge the door.
"What foolery is this?"
he yelled to the door.
"This is your king. Open these doors."
He was thinking to give whoever did this a fright so that they would yield a bit and he could shove harder. But then he heard his favorite giggle and knew that he was doomed. Marissa giggled through the door, quite pleased with herself. "Dear, you two have been avoiding each other for a 10-day. Get it out of your systems. We will have you healed up afterwards, don't you worry," she yelled through the closed doors. She was having a very hard time not laughing, imagining his face right now. She just hoped that Tiara could hold her door until she could get there and use her magic to seal it like she had this one. "Love you!" Then she was off, running through the corridors that she had practically grown up wandering around. Arion sighed and turned around reluctantly, seeing Gareth taking off the blindfold and staring dumbfounded at the throne. He shook his head and walked over, putting on his kingly smile that he used with the nobles he didn't like.
"Gareth, what brings you?"
He tried to sound nonchalant, but it came out strained anyway. So much had happened since that day, but it was still vivid in his mind. "What brings me? My wife tricked me, that's what brings me." Gareth stormed angrily back to the door he came in and pushed, but though it gave a little, it didn't open. "That's it." He backed up a good 6 feet and lowered his shoulder, but felt a hand on his back and snapped around before he could charge. "Don't touch me!"
"Gareth."
"Don't even try your placating words on me. We both know you don't care." He pushed the king away from him with everything he had, focusing his anger at how powerless he had felt lately with everything, especially his son. The king went backwards, but he kept his footing, turning around to try and stay balanced.
Don't placate you.
Arion was usually the calm one, but with all that had been going on in the city and against his family, he finally lost control. He rushed his one-time friend, anger twisting his features.
You are the one that struck me.
He swung, his fist connecting with the man's jaw loudly. They were both big men in different ways. Gareth was shorter, but had more strength, while Arion was taller with better skill. All in all, they were well matched. Gareth took the hit and turned his head with it, never losing a step. He came back around with his own fist as his head turned to glare at the king. He saw the king throw his arms up in front of his face to block the hit and opened his fist at the last minute, grabbing an arm and pushing out and up with the momentum. This threw the king back off his feet a little so that he couldn't keep his balance at all. He stalked after the man and watched him land and roll to his knees to get up, facing away from him. You are damn right I struck you. You had it coming, Mr. High and Mighty, talking down to me like I was one of your lowly subjects. He placed his foot on the king's back to shove him down, but Arion spun, grabbing the foot and lifted it up with high with effort, sending Gareth up in the air and sprawling to the floor. Gareth hit flat on his back, feeling the air rush out of him.
I was trying to. I needed.
Arion saw his old friend lying there on the floor of the throne room and couldn't defend himself. He was placating him back then, trying to defuse a bad situation with his office instead of talking to a trusted friend. The king sighed and stood slowly, offering a hand to the breathless warrior on the floor.
I'm sorry, Gareth. You're right. I let my pride get in the way all these years, and I never even thought about how wrong I was. I only focused on how hurt my pride was when you hit me in front of my entire court.
Laid you out, the big man said quietly, just getting his breath back.
Yeah, you did, didn't you?
Arion laughed at the memory. It was all he could do now that he had given in to being wrong in the first place. The man could hit like a runaway horse. I shouldn't have, though. Not there. I should have just accepted that you chose the thief over me. He hung his head, remembering how hurt he felt when his closest friend had not chosen him to guard the people of the North. Back then, Arion had just proposed that the people needed bastions of defense in each of the 3 outlands of Lithanol, to the east, north, and west. He appointed one of his trustworthy companions to each post, but when it came to the north, Arion chose Tenon over Gareth.
Gareth.
Arion knew his friend was still hurting, but he didn't know how to explain it without hurting him even more. He had thought long and hard over that fateful decision. With it being newly manned and the fields planted late, there was a good chance that the winters would be very hard for a couple of years. It was a hard post, and he knew that Tenon would have done better, mainly because he cared less. The position needed someone that could make the hard choices and not always the right ones. Gareth cared too much about the people to make those kinds of choices. It had devastated the kind-hearted warrior. No, don't. I know why you chose Tenon. He is charismatic, charming, and smart, all the things you think I'm not. He turned his back on the king. He had thought about having this conversation for the last 18 years, but now that it was here, he didn't really want to.
That's not why.
Arion, Tira was pregnant, for heaven's sake. I was counting on you to help us.
I know, Gareth. That's why I sent Carolyn to help with the birth. But you don't understand.
Arion hadn't thought about this, had tried not to think about it, but it was weighing on him now.
Will you let me explain, please?
You didn't even come to see us. All these years, Arion. Gareth walked over and leaned on the throne, resting his head. You were my closest friend, the brother I never had.
I know. And I let you down, but hear me out.
He put his arm around his old friend and explained that fateful decision. After that, they sat there, well into the night, talking and catching each other up on 18 years of missed memories. On the other side of the door, the 2 girls sighed quietly, knowing the worst was over. Marissa let her scrying spell fade and smiled at Tierra, still sitting in the chair blocking the door. Well, we did it. They will be talking for a while now, so we might as well go get a drink or 3. She was so relieved that Arion and Gareth were talking that she might cry. It had eaten her husband inside and out all these years, and they had missed so much over something pride built. I'm just glad Gareth didn't charge the door when I heard him say, that's it. I thought it was over. She smiled and jumped up, taking the queen's arm and leading her down the hall. Now we just have to root out the conspirators, defeat the greed evil, and stay alive doing it. Yeah, Thank the God the hard part's over. Fixing men's pride was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. They laughed all the way to the king's sitting room, where all the best bottles were kept. And that is an excerpt from The Darkness Within. If you haven't read book one, it probably isn't going to make a whole lot of sense, but I hope you enjoyed it anyway. And again, if you haven't read book one, please feel free to go and grab that too. That way you'll know. Thank you for joining us. My name is Michael D. Nadeau, and that was Alan Provence. And enjoy.